So I've got 28 movies to talk to you about today. 28 movies that I watched in July 2024. I can't believe it's already August, but honestly, I love this time of year. I love August. It's true, it's still summer. It's still horrifically hot outside, but this is like the big anticipation month. This is the month when just all of the hopes and dreams for the Halloween season, September and October, they're all on the horizon, and I just get so excited. So let's get excited for August by talking about a bunch of horror movies. I think it's safe to say this is a horror deep dive watch list, because of the 28 movies that I watched in July, either for the first time or at least on a new Blu-ray or 4K release for the first time, I've got 3 movies that are not horror movies, and then outside of a few new releases that I checked out, this is a deep dive horror watch list. This is a lot of like off the beaten path kind of stuff. So let's get excited for August, for spooky season on the horizon, and talk about a bunch of horror movies. Yeah, 28, my biggest watch list video ever. By the way, welcome to the Cobwebs channel. My name is Daniel. I should probably say that. So over the last month, I watched all the movies in Danza Macabra Volume 3. This is a box set of old school Spanish gothic films that a company called Severin Films put out. I watched them all, reviewed them all here on the channel, but as a little recap, because I watched them over the last month, my number 28, my least favorite movie I watched last month, because I do rank all of these from worst to best, at least based on my own experience, is Necrophagous. So Necrophagous is, yeah, a Spanish gothic film. It's from 1971. Very difficult to explain the plot of this movie to you. Basically, like, there's a graveyard, there's an evil scientist, there's a monster, and the plot just never really comes together in this movie at all. Like, it just never really became about anything, and I found it to be an extremely boring and frustrating experience. Also just frustrating because the cover there promises you a really cool looking monster, or at least some kind of horrific looking zombie creature, but nothing like that shows up in this movie at all. Now, I've said on this channel before, in fact pretty recently, that I just love practical effects. Like 99.8% of the time, if it's a practical effect in a horror movie, I like it, even if it's bad, even if it's unrealistic. But the practical effect of the monster in this is horrible. Like, it's one of the worst effects I've ever seen in my life, and you hardly even see that. So most of the movie, you don't even get a monster. I don't know what this is. I thought it was awful. But my number 27 is another movie in that box set, and it's Cross of the Devil. Now, I admit, this is a movie that's based on the Knights Templar legends and stories, and that's the same thing that the Tombs of the Blind Dead movies are based on, and I haven't seen the Tombs of the Blind Dead movies. It's on my list. I will check it out, but this is kind of an unofficial, people consider it an unofficial Tombs of the Blind Dead movie, but so far it's the only one I've seen, and I didn't like it, mainly just because I thought it was really boring, not because it's particularly terrible. It's just dull, extremely talky, with a lot of conversations that are just not very interesting, but a couple of remarkable things about it is it was directed by John Gilling, who made The Plague of the Zombies, like one of my favorite zombie movies of all time, and written by Paul Naschy. I love Paul Naschy, a Spanish guy making a bunch of movies back in the 70s. And so I had high hopes for this one, and it just didn't really deliver for me. Number 26, another movie in this box set, is Cake of Blood. And Cake of Blood is an anthology, which made it a lot less boring than the last 2 movies, because at least the stories keep switching up. But the individual stories are still pretty boring. Like, there is a Frankenstein one that's kind of interesting. There's a vampire one that's at least got some good aesthetics, but it's just not a very interesting anthology. And these 3 movies, they were a little tough to get through, but the box set kind of became worth it because of the last movie, but we'll talk about that way later in this video. So next up, I've got a couple of new releases, new horror movies that came out this year that I checked out. So at number 25 is Imaginary. So this is a PG-13 Blumhouse horror movie that got a ton of crap when it came out. People just hated it, bashed on it relentlessly. I'm putting it low on the list because, like, I don't think it's very good, but I also think it was kind of unfairly bashed as much as it was. I don't think it's terrible. It feels like a TV movie, I will say that. It almost feels like a Hallmark movie. Like, if Hallmark made a horror movie, it would kind of be Imaginary. But the reason that I give this movie some credit is it actually does have some decent imagination behind it. It's about imaginary friends, and it's actually got some, kind of an interesting perspective about how imaginary friends are not really imaginary. They're these kind of spiritual creatures. And there's a point in the movie where the characters actually like go into the world of the imaginary friends. It's not near as cool as it probably should be, but there is some imagination on display. They're trying to make something kind of interesting, and there is a giant teddy bear effect that's actually not bad. But all in all, it is, fairly dull, not very well written, and just feels like a Hallmark horror movie. So I don't particularly like it, but I didn't think it was that bad. And my wife and I watched it together and we had a decent time with it. But at number 24 is a movie that I was much more disappointed in. And that is Ty West's Maxine. I feel like I had a worse experience with Maxine than I did with Imaginary because I expected the world from Maxine and I didn't get it. I was very disappointed. I expected nothing from Imaginary. And it was a little better than I expected. But still, if you were to force me to rewatch one of these movies, I would rewatch Maxine. It's the third movie in Ty West's X trilogy. The first two films I loved. This one I really didn't like. And I posted a review on it here on this channel, and I kind of feel like I ruined some people's day with that video. Like, some people were pretty bummed, kind of upset that I didn't like this movie. And, I am kind of sorry about that, but also it kind of annoys me when YouTubers really try to tiptoe around their negative opinions with it didn't really work for me, but I can see how it would work from other people. I just think that's boring. We're just talking about movies here. It's not the end of the world. Let's just say what we think. And so I'm going to continue to do that. And I will say I did not like Maxine. I thought it was a huge mess. I thought it was just ridiculously overly complicated for the simple little story that it's trying to tell. I thought it was very predictable and just not satisfying as a horror movie at all. It's got minimal kills, minimal violence, and I'm not bashing it for not being scary because I hardly ever get scared by horror movies anymore. I don't need horror movies to be scary, but it doesn't really feel like it's even attempting to. There's not really any attempt at scares really at all, and that's kind of a bummer for me. But I did hear a couple of arguments that kind of trying to justify that I kind of wanted to address. The first one is a lot of people are saying, well, it's really not a horror movie. It's a crime thriller. And to that, I just say, if that's true, then the third act of this movie is even more disastrous than I already thought it was. I think the third act of this movie is pretty darn bad. But if this is a crime thriller, that's one of the worst third acts of all time. So I don't think that works. I think that makes the movie worse. And the other argument is, well, it's not a horror movie. It's a rags to riches, rise to stardom movie, like a Boogie Nights, something like that. And the movie doesn't work for me in that respect either because I don't care about Maxine getting famous. Maxine is an incredibly selfish character, and she's very open about that. Explicitly states many times throughout this movie, she only cares about herself, and she only cares about getting famous. And she's not an artist, really. She doesn't really have something to share with the world or something to say. She's very open about the fact that she just cares about getting famous.
I always wanted to be famous.
And I don't think she really cares if that's in a movie or if that's from being on something like Keeping Up with the Kardashians and just being famous for being famous. I don't think that matters to her. And I don't care. I don't care about her getting famous at all. And you might think that's harsh. Maybe I'm being mean, but Maxine wouldn't care either. She wouldn't care about anybody else getting famous because she only cares about herself. She's very open about that. I find her kind of an entertaining character at times, but not a character I particularly care about. I think Pearl is the much more interesting character of this trilogy. So Maxine didn't work for me, but between that and Imaginary, I'd probably watch Maxine again beforehand. So at number 23 on the other end of the spectrum, this is a giallo from what year is this from? 1971? Yeah, 1971. And I don't own this. I checked this out on the Arrow streaming service. This is a giallo. Did I even say the title? This is called The Fifth Chord. It's a giallo starring Franco Nero. Been meaning to see it for a long time, and it's basically about Franco Nero, who is a reporter, but he is a drunk who's constantly talking about how he's such a drunk and he can't get his life together, who is in love with this woman, but she's with somebody else and she doesn't really want to be in a relationship with him, but they kind of have this back and forth. And it turns out there are some murders that are occurring that Franco Nero's got to solve as our typical giallo private detective. And I thought this movie was okay. I thought it was fine. It wasn't a standout giallo to me by any means. The kills are there's definitely nothing standout here. I wasn't very interested in the mystery, to be honest. I didn't think it built a mystery very well. And when we got to it felt like way, way overly complicated. And I was like, why are we going off on all of these directions? And then when it got to the final reveal, it was incredibly simple. And I was like, this movie did not need to be as complicated as it was. So I didn't find the end reveal like that great, but it's totally fine. And like Franco Nero, I always like to see him in a movie. He's entertaining enough. And the movie looks beautiful. It's very, very well shot. And has a lot of very beautiful Italian actresses, as Giallo often does. So always a plus. At number 22, here's a movie I bought. This is Crybaby. Released on 4K by Kino Lorber. I'd never seen this before. And honestly, I was totally sold on this movie by my buddy Ken over at Mid-Level Media. Love his channel. And he gave an epic review of this movie, and he loves it so much, and I love that he loves it. I just really appreciate his enthusiasm for this film. A John Waters film, and actually my first John Waters film. And based on my viewing of this movie, I don't think John Waters is for me. I'm just being honest. I think he's just a bit much for me. And I've heard this is one of his more commercial movies. And one where he kind of tones himself down a little bit. And it was still just incredibly bombastic and crazy, and not really in a way that I loved. I thought it was entertaining. It looks beautiful. It's actually got some good music. It's a musical, which I wasn't sure about when I put it on, but it's got some good music. And there is a scene where Johnny Depp and the leading actress named Amy Locane, the actress's name is Amy Locane. They have this scene where they're both explaining how their parents died because they're both orphans. And I don't mean to sound insensitive, but that is like one of the funniest scenes I've seen in a long time. It is hilarious watching them discuss the death of their parents. I know that sounds weird, but if you see the movie, you'll understand. So I thought Crybaby was okay. Just a bit much for me, and I just didn't personally love it, but that's okay. At number 22, we've got Alvin and the Chipmunks meet Frankenstein. Okay, so I loved the Alvin and the Chipmunks meet monster movies back when I was a kid. There's this and one other. And honestly, I just kind of forgot about them, and I haven't thought about them in a very long time. And then somebody commented on a werewolf video that I made a long time ago, like my top 15 werewolf movies, and said one of their favorite werewolf movies is Alvin the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman. And I was like, oh my gosh, it's like this flashback of remembering these movies I was so into when I was a kid. So I bought both of them on DVD. I watched them both with my son, this one with my wife as well. I had a great time showing them to my son. Now, this one didn't hold up super well for me. We'll talk about the other one later on this list. But it's pretty fun. You know, Alvin the Chipmunks, they're at this theme park. It doesn't have, I kind of wanted it to be like a Halloween movie, but it takes place in the summer. It's got a very summertime feel. And there's just, you know, Frankenstein hanging out at a theme park, and the chipmunks befriend him, and it's cute. It's fun. The third act is kind of disappointing for me because it involves Alvin getting turned into a monster, but he really just turns into like an Animaniacs typical wacky cartoon character. And that's kind of what the third act becomes. And not really what I want from a movie like this. But yeah, it's super nostalgic for me. I did enjoy this, even though I don't think this one specifically is all that great. Next up, we've got Reptilicus. So I got this in from Vinegar Syndrome, this beautiful 4K edition, because I recently became a subscriber for Vinegar Syndrome, which means I get all of their mainline releases automatically. I paid for it all up front. So I probably wouldn't have chosen to buy this movie, but I got it. I watched it. I had a much better time with it than I expected. I'm actually not a big kaiju fan, giant monster fan. Some of them I like, but it's not it's not like gothic horror for me, which I'm just a mark for. But this was pretty fun. It's a Danish-American co-production, so it takes place in Denmark. So I got Danish actors dubbed over by non-Danish actors. And the monster Reptilicus is just so incredibly goofy looking. And that's why most people will tell you this movie is bad, because the effects are terrible. But I found the effects charming. Like, honestly, I thought it was fun. I was having a good time when Reptilicus was on screen. And the character stuff, a little better than I would have expected. Honestly, like a little bit better. So I had a fine time with this. I did a review for it here on the channel, so check that out for more thoughts. At number 19, a movie I don't own, and that is Legend of the Werewolf. So this is a 1975 Tyburn film. Tyburn was a company that started up in the 70s to like be a competitor to Hammer, but they only ended up releasing 3 movies, at least theatrically. And this is one of them, a movie I've been meaning to see for a long time, finally got to check it out. I talked about it in my recent werewolf video that I just did. So Legend of the Werewolf is actually based on the novel A Werewolf of Paris, A Werewolf in Paris. It's the same novel that Curse of the Werewolf from Hammer is based on. But it's about a feral boy who is raised by wolves and he gets taken in by a traveling circus. He grows up and he turns out to be a werewolf. I guess that's just what happens when you get raised by wolves. And, you know, he goes around killing people whenever he turns into a werewolf, and Peter Cushing is the local town doctor who works with the police, who is like our amateur detective who's trying to figure out what's going on with these murders, what's going on with this werewolf. And it's fun. It's charming. I didn't think it was amazing. I don't think it's near as good as Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf, but I had a good time with it, and Peter Cushing is super charming in this. At number 18, a Netflix movie that I checked out on Netflix. This is Hellhole from 2022. I checked this out because I made a video last month on my top 10 movies that take place in a creepy church, and this movie really fits that. Very creepy monastery full of monks, and this is a Polish film about this priest who goes into this monastery full of monks because there have been a lot of women disappearing in the nearby village, and he's kind of trying to investigate what's going on, and he finds the monks are into some really weird stuff, and there's demonic stuff and human sacrifice and cannibalism. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens, and the very end of this movie like really goes for it, and the movie prepares you for that. I just wasn't sure, like, you know, this little Polish Netflix movie, like, it's not going to go that big, is it? Oh, it goes that big. And I was pretty impressed. So I thought this was a good movie. I definitely liked it. But a movie that is not as good, but I enjoyed more, I just gotta be honest, is the Vinegar Syndrome 4K of Flesheater. Oh, I don't think I can show that slipcover because you guys are children. I know that. Only children watch this channel, which is why I have to censor things. Whatever. Okay, Flesheater, there's the censored cover. This is an 80s zombie movie that's actually starring and directed by, and maybe written by too, I'm not sure. Honestly, like, I don't know if anybody really wants to take the credit for writing this screenplay, but it's a zombie movie. Yeah, done by Bill Hinsman. So Bill Hinsman was the guy who played the OG zombie in Night of the Living Dead in the graveyard. So apparently, like, the remake was getting made. It was like, you know, in development, and he was like, hey, you know what? I think people would like to see me as a zombie again instead of just a remake of Night of the Living Dead. So I'm going to make my own zombie movie. And gosh darn it, he did it. And he did a really fun job. This is a movie where a bunch of people go out on a hayride. So it's got a really good fall, farmland, Halloween atmosphere that I loved. They go out into the woods, and some guy digs up a coffin and opens up the coffin, and Bill Hinsman, the zombie, is in there, and he gets up, chomps on them. And the movie starts out like really, really simple. You know, like they start holding up in this old farmhouse. There's a zombie outside, and it feels like it's just going to be a Night of the Living Dead copy, but with way worse actors and script. But the movie builds. It's not just that. Like, it keeps growing and growing and growing in terms of scale, and it gets, dare I say, epic by the end. That's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but compared to where it started, it kind of becomes epic comparatively. And I had a good time with this. I watched it with a group of friends. We had a good time. We were really laughing at just the ridiculously bad dialogue and the ridiculously bad performances. Like, anytime people interact, like one of my buddies, I think, said, was watching it, he's like, it doesn't even feel like any of them are talking to each other. They're all just sitting around each other saying things. And that's almost how it feels. But with a group of friends, it was a good time. So I quite enjoyed Flesheater on 4K. Is it a gorgeous 4K? I mean, no, but it's a cheap little 80s movie, and I had a good time. So at number 16, we've got Creepshow 2. Definitely not my first time seeing the movie, but actually my first time watching it on Blu-ray. I think I'd only streamed it before, or watched it on DVD, I think. And so I filmed a review for this movie. It's actually going to be the next video on the channel will be my Creepshow 2 review, because I did a Creepshow 1 review and you guys seem to enjoy it. So hey, Creepshow 2. My ultimate take on this movie is, like, I don't think it's a big drop in quality from the original Creepshow, but it is a big drop in my affection for it. So I don't love it near as much as the original Creepshow, but I think there are a lot of good things about it that make it pretty solid. solid. And that's all I'll say, so check out my review when it comes out. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. So moving right along in this ranking to my top 15, at number 15, I cracked back into this Severin box set, All the Haunts Be Ours, a compendium of folk horror. I love this box set. I think it's the greatest thing that Severin Films has ever done. It's a collection of, I think, like 20 folk horror films, which is one of my favorite subgenres of horror, absolutely. I want to dive deeper into folk horror this fall. And like an amazing documentary on folk horror. So I love this box set, but I watched one of the movies that I'd never seen before called Robin Redbreast. It's from 1970. Yeah, there it is. So Robin Redbreast, there you go. A lot of people have said that it's like a precursor to The Wicker Man, and it definitely is. Like, it's no Wicker Man, don't get me wrong, but it's technically a TV movie from England back in 1970. And it's quite good for that. You can only tell it's a TV movie because most of it's just people talking. You don't get a ton of like action, or you can tell it's a low budget, but the conversations are pretty interesting. The actors are pretty strong. It's about a woman who recently breaks up with her very long-term partner, and she moves to a small farmhouse in the countryside to kind of unwind. And she meets the locals there, some creepy stuff going on. And she meets a guy named Robin, and they kind of have this connection. And the movie is kind of a typical folk horror film in that it's about the old religions coming to clash with modern life. And I thought it was pretty darn good. I definitely liked it quite a bit. It's interesting to see kind of the roots of where The Wicker Man would come from. Even though The Wicker Man is way better, Robin Redbreast is quite good. So at number 14, we've got Catacombs. So another movie that I watched for my creepy church video. This is a Scream Factory double pack I have with Cellar Dweller. We're not talking about Cellar Dweller right now. Imagine I'm taking a Sharpie, crossing that out. We're just talking about Catacombs, which is definitely the better movie of the two anyway. I quite enjoyed this. It's about a monastery, very creepy, very atmospheric monastery, where centuries ago there was an ancient evil locked in under the monastery in the catacombs, possibly a demon-possessed person or possibly like a beast of the apocalypse. It cuts to the present day where a young woman's coming to visit the monastery and take pictures, and people start to discover, yeah, there's some creepy stuff in the catacombs of this monastery. And I really liked it. I thought most of the horror of it was like not great, and it's definitely a movie on a budget. It was the last movie produced by Empire Pictures, actually, back in the 80s. But I did like the actors, the performances, the character interactions. I actually thought were often pretty interesting, better than I expected. So yeah, I talked about this a little more in depth in my Creepy Church video, so check that out. I quite liked it, honestly. At number 13, we've got The Borderlands. This is from 2013, so look at that. This is a British found footage horror film about a team that works for the Vatican, and their job is to go to places where there is a claim of a miracle, a literal act of God, and they document everything, investigate, and try to figure out, is it a miracle or is it a hoax, or does it have a rational or a real life, physical life explanation, shall we say. So I thought that was a pretty interesting concept to watch a team like that. They go to this very creepy church where this priest claims there was an act of God, film everything, investigate, and they discover some really creepy stuff. I actually like that this, I don't think this is a spoiler, but it's not really a satanic horror film. So it's a little different. It's a little bit more like, kind of like Robin Redbreast, like the old gods, the old religion coming to clash with modern life. And that's a theme that I find very interesting. That's probably why I love folk horror so much. And this was a good movie, good performances, good. I really liked watching the two main guys like clash in the beginning, but then have more respect for each other as the movie goes. The character development was pretty solid. So at number 12, we've got Alice, Sweet Alice. Also talked about this in my Creepy Church video. I've been meaning to see this for years. It's like a big horror classic I'd never watched. Finally watched it on this Arrow Video Blu-ray. And I really liked it. It's a movie about a single mom, and she's got two daughters, and her youngest daughter turns up dead. And it's a pretty disturbing scene where they find that. And people suspect the next to youngest daughter, who's still just a kid, maybe she did it. So the movie is like this mystery of, could a child be capable of this? And I thought it was pretty good, pretty interesting, good creepy church atmosphere. Good movie. At number 11, okay, back to Alvin and the Chipmunks. Yes, I'm talking about Alvin and the Chipmunks at this point in the video. You might think that's insane, this high. Alvin and the Chipmunks meet the Wolfman. Okay, my first point, I have massive nostalgia for this. And I thought it held up pretty darn good. A lot better than Frankenstein. I thought this was solid. It's for the Alvin the Chipmunks. Alvin is super obsessed with monsters, so he's this total monster kid. He reminds me so much of myself when I was a little kid. And Dave ends up grounding him for monster stuff, so he can't no longer play Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the school play. So Theodore jumps into the role, and they also discovered that their neighbor is a werewolf, and Theodore gets bitten and he's becoming a werewolf, all while playing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So it's like a mashup of werewolves, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but also the actual plot is really just Fright Night meets Teen Wolf. So two classic movies from 1985, because all the stuff about possibly a werewolf living next door to them, it's like Fright Night exactly. All the stuff about Theodore getting bitten by a werewolf and turning into a werewolf and getting kind of more cool at school, it's Teen Wolf, like all the way. So I love Fright Night. I quite enjoy Teen Wolf. So it was fun to watch like the little kid version of it. And I watched it with my son. He's 1.5, and he was locked into this movie a lot more than he was with Frankenstein. And it was a lovely time watching this with my kid. I just really enjoyed it. It was nice. So moving right along into the top 10, a movie I definitely did not watch with my son. This is Curse of the Devil, which is a Paul Naschy horror film from 1973. Curse of the Devil, or known by the Spanish title, So this is part of Paul Naschy's Waldemar Daninsky series, where he plays werewolf character Waldemar Daninsky. And what I liked about this one is it's definitely a werewolf movie, and quite satisfying as a werewolf movie. I think the werewolf makeup is really good, like probably one of the best in the whole Waldemar Daninsky series that Paul Naschy did. And like the kills are pretty gory, and like it's a really good werewolf movie. But it's also a really good witch and like occult movie, because his origin for how he becomes a werewolf in this version, because he has so many different origin stories throughout the series, is he gets cursed by a witch, and I really liked all that stuff. So a lot of really cool atmosphere. I talked about this in my last video on the channel about werewolf movies, so check that out. At number 9, another Vinegar Syndrome release. This is Rushweek. So I was really excited to get this in and check this out, because it's a college set 80s slasher. So right there, you got me. You got me, because I love 80s slashers, and I love slashers that take place on college campuses. It's an atmosphere I really enjoy. But also it's got like a killer that looks this cool. It's a Halloween movie. It's got a Halloween party in it. It just checks so many boxes for me. And I really, really enjoyed this movie. Now, the downside with it is the whodunit aspect, the mystery of the slasher thing. To me personally was incredibly obvious. Like, I called the killer very early on, but whatever, who cares about that? Also, actually, the bigger flaw of this movie is the kills are really weak. Like, you do get stalking sequences, and like the kill is happening, and generally the killer like throws an axe down on somebody and it cuts. So you don't get a lot of gore in this movie, which is kind of disappointing, but I can forgive it when the movie around it is so entertaining. Like, I did like the actors and the characters. They were pretty fun, you know, nothing deep here, but fun. And the Halloween party is a blast. They actually call the Halloween party in this Fright Night. Perfect. Right up my alley. Rushweek is a really fun, just little forgotten little slasher movie that Vinegar Syndrome put out. So, you know, that's why I love Vinegar Syndrome. They put out these movies that I probably never would have seen. Check them out, and I usually have a pretty darn good time. So, at number 8. Okay, we are finally coming back to Danza Macabra Volume 3 with my favorite movie in the set, as you can see, because it's really high on this list, which is The Night of the Walking Dead. It's crazy how much better this movie is than any of the other movies. It starts out and it just feels like a very sleazy, kind of low rent movie, and I wasn't totally sure about it. But when it really becomes clear who the main character is, who is a young woman who is dying of a terminal illness, the movie became a lot more interesting. She meets this vampire who's like Count Rudolph or something like that, and they kind of fall for each other, and she has this romance with the vampire because she's literally dying. So she feels kind of on the brink of death all the time. So she feels like this attraction to him and his world of constant living death. And I thought their relationship between a living woman and a vampire was actually like really good, really interesting. I thought he was a really good and sympathetic vampire. even though, unlike something like, Twilight or something, they don't soften his vampireness at all. Like, he kills people, and his vampire friends slaughter people, and it's bloody. It's clearly a horrible thing to be a vampire in this, but also this dying woman is getting sucked into their world. So I thought it was really good. It's probably one of my favorite 70s vampire movies, and I'm glad I got that box set to check out this movie. At number 7, we've got Tales That Witness Madness from 1973. I feel like I've got a lot of movies from 1973 on this list. A lot of 70s. And this is a horror anthology. I did a whole review for it on the channel. It's not an Amicus film. Y'all know I've been talking a lot about Amicus on the channel recently, but it feels exactly like an Amicus film, but a good version of it. Like, to one degree or another, I liked all the segments, and I thought there was one that was really strong about a man who brings this tree into his house as like a piece of art and becomes obsessed with the tree, even at the expense of his wife, played by the insanely gorgeous Joan Collins. That was a great segment. They're all good segments. I thought this was a good movie, so if you want to hear more about it, check out my review for it. Did it last month. At number 6, holy cow. I cannot believe how much I enjoyed this movie. I am almost, dare I say, ashamed to say how much I enjoyed this movie. And that is the Chinese torture chamber story. So this is from Vinegar Syndrome. This is one that I got automatically because of my subscription. And I don't know if I would have bought this otherwise, because I'm not into torture movies. Like, I'm not into the whole Saw, Hostel. I'm not a torture fan, either watching it or getting it happen to me. No torture, please. But this movie's not really that much of a torture movie. It's a Hong Kong film from the 90s. And really what it is this woman is being tried. She's on trial for killing her husband. And she claims she did not kill him. And the judge is very corrupt. And he actually knows who killed the husband. And he's protecting that person for certain reasons. But he's just basically trying to torture her and this other guy who's involved with her. Into giving a confession so that he can just sign off. Okay, I got the murders. It's done. We executed them. Like, done. And now he doesn't have to worry about the person he's protecting anymore. But most of the movie is watching the whole story of this girl's life and like watching what happened to lead up to this. So most of it's not really a torture movie. It does have some really graphic torture sequences, but none of it was too much for me. But this is a Cat 3 movie. So if you don't know what Cat 3 is, Category 3, it's basically a rating in Hong Kong back in these days at least. That basically said you're going to watch some really messed up stuff if you watch this movie. And you do. Like, torture stuff, yes. But this is basically like a crazy sex movie. Like, I'm not even kidding. It is so sleazy and so crazy. It is maybe the craziest movie I've ever seen. I can't even tell you how much bonkers insanity I witnessed in this film. My favorite scene being a scene that is like a wuxia fight scene between two people, like, that whole Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon thing where people are like flying through the air and all that kind of stuff. Almost like anime, but it's not a fight scene. It's a sex scene.
What?
Yes. So it is this couple just like flying through the air at each other, like screaming and doing all this crazy stuff while flying. And it's a sex scene. It's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe my eyeballs, but I really liked it. I really liked this movie. Like, I was just so entertained, flabbergasted by the things I was seeing. But I was kind of invested in the story and the characters, actually, more than I was expecting to. So I'm so far really happy with my Vinegar Syndrome subscription. Getting stuff that I probably wouldn't have bought normally, wouldn't have watched normally. Checking it out and having a good time, especially with this. So if all of the bonkers stuff that I said reviewing this movie interests you, I really do recommend this if you're that kind of person, but not for everybody. Like, good Lord. Not for everybody. But at number 5, a new release and one of the few non-horror movies that I watched over the last month, Twisters from 2024, the sequel to the Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt 90s classic. And I just had a great time with this movie. I went to see it with my wife because she's actually a massive fan of the original Twister. She introduced me to the movie. I'd never seen Twister growing up. So she showed it to me a few years ago, and I've seen it several times since. I think it's a blast. So she was really hyped for Twister. She also loves Glenn Powell, like really loves Glenn Powell. He's like her top crush right now, and who can blame her? Glenn Powell is like a classic movie star. We don't have a lot of classic movie stars, people with just a lot of charisma. Like, our version of a modern movie star now that's new is like, what, Timothy Chalamet? Yikes. Glenn Powell is an old school, like 90s kind of a movie star. And I really like him. Twisters was just a blast. It was an old school 90s style blockbuster that was just fun, crowd pleasing. My wife and I had a great time watching it. And there's not a ton to say about it because just a straightforward action adventure movie with a cute romance and charismatic actors. I had a great time. Okay, at number 4, we've got one of my favorite giallos, and that is The Case of the Bloody Iris. So this brand new boutique label that put out this 4K called Celluloid Dreams, they actually sent this to me for review, so I'll just be honest about that. I'm so grateful that they sent it to me because it looks fantastic on 4K. It's a giallo I saw many years ago just on streaming and thought it was like so underrated, like so good. But I think it was just, underrated because a lot of people hadn't seen it because its presence on physical media was not much. But I hope more people get the chance to check this out on this new 4K, because I really enjoyed it. It's just such a classic giallo, it's got the typical kind of giallo plot, typical kind of giallo killer and kills, but it just executes it all so well. So if you just want a classic style giallo that gives you that giallo stuff you expect, but does it really well, this is a really good version of it. I did a review for it on the channel, so if you want to hear more about it, check that out. At number 3, a movie I watched on streaming. I was actually on Amazon Prime Video, and that is Howl from 2015. So I watched this leading up to my last video, which is on Werewolf Movies. Checking this movie out because I'd always heard it was good, but never seen it. The movie kind of blew me away. Like, I was shocked how much I kind of loved this movie. This is a direct-to-video British horror film about these people that are on a train. The train breaks down in the middle of nowhere, like out in the woods, and they're trying to figure out how to get this train back up and running, how to be able to get back to civilization. And it's a really stressful situation all on its own. Like, you really feel like, yeah, that would suck if that happened to you, especially at night. But it's worse because there are werewolves out in the woods, and now they're being hunted down by these werewolves. And it's this very intense survival story with 2 main characters that I thought were very sympathetic and likable because they're the working class. They're the people who work on this train or are trying to deal with all these irate customers. They're very easy to identify with. But then you just got a lot of other personalities on the train, right? It's a very Night of the Living Dead kind of situation. But the werewolf stuff is brutal. Like, this movie is dark. It is mean. It is way more mean to these characters than you might expect it to be. The werewolves, sometimes they look really good. Sometimes there's just too much CGI, but the movie around it is good enough that I forgive that. I thought Howl was terrific. But at number 2 is Fletch, the other non-horror movie that I watched this month. Fletch is just great. I'd seen it before, of course, but it's my first time checking it out on the new Kino Lorber release, and I'm so glad to now own it in my collection with this nice slipcover. The thing I love about Fletch is it's like most of it's not really like a comedy. It really plays like a straightforward, like private detective, except he's technically a reporter, mystery movie. And it's a good mystery. It's intriguing. It keeps me guessing. But it's just a comedy because Chevy Chase is just constantly saying like the funniest stuff you've ever heard in your life. Like, he is so hilarious. Just all of his dry wit, his sarcasm. It's just a straightforward mystery movie where our main character is hilarious, constantly just shooting off all these one-liners. And this movie is so much fun. It is just one of the most fun 80s comedies for me because I love the mystery, and I think Chevy Chase is phenomenal in it. This is the movie that actually converted me on Chevy Chase. I didn't really get the appeal of Chevy Chase before I saw Fletch years ago, and I was like, he's awesome. Like, he's so good in this movie, and he absolutely is. But at my number 1, it's Longlegs, brand new serial killer horror film, the breakout horror hit of the year. I think it's fair to say at this point, this movie has made so much money on its incredibly low indie budget. It's just so impressive, but it is like a Silence of the Lambs type serial killer film with a really cool satanic twist on it all. It's directed by Osgood Perkins, who also made The Blackcoat's Daughter. Feels very in line with The Blackcoat's Daughter. And I loved it. I thought it was great. It's been interesting to see people's reactions to this movie, because a lot of people are loving it too, but some people seem to be very upset about the marketing. Like, they're very upset that this movie was very much marketed as like the scariest movie of the year, the scariest movie ever. And then people go to see it and they're like, that wasn't that scary. Not scariest movie of the year or scariest movie ever. Come on. This movie, it seems like they're either mad at the movie because it's not as scary as the marketing made it out to be, or they're just mad at the marketing for being superlative. And like, I have to ask, can we not have fun with horror movie marketing anymore? Like, do you really want the trailer of this movie to say, a movie that's kind of creepy sometimes, or if you're a seasoned horror fan, maybe not that scary? Is that what you want? Can we not have fun with, like, superlatives and horror market? Like, Last House on the Left poster, that classic tagline, it's only a movie, it's only a movie. Like, do you go see Last House on the Left and then say, I never saw it, so I never said it's only a movie over and over. The poster should have said a movie that will make you say, this is kind of disturbing. Like, come on, that's lame. Alien, in space, no one can hear you scream. Do you want it to be in space? No one can hear you maybe kind of gasp a couple of times and be surprised. What? Like, let's have fun, okay? Don't take this kind of marketing too seriously. No one can tell you what you're going to be scared by. Nobody. I can't. Nobody can, because it's so subjective. Like, I've talked on this channel about movies that I think are scary. I have talked about how I think Ghost Watch is one of the scariest movies I've ever seen. And then I've gotten people commenting being like, yeah, I watched it. It was boring. It's subjective, guys. You just never know, because fear is an emotion. It's not math. Movies are not math, guys. Horror movies, what's going to be scary for you? It's not math. But I will say, all that being said, Longlegs is the scariest movie of the year for me personally. And I didn't think it was that scary, but it is the closest I've come to being scared in a horror movie this year. So I thought it was creepy. I loved Nicolas Cage's performance. I loved the atmosphere. I loved Micah Monroe's performance. Holy cow, she was so good in this movie. I think this movie is awesome. I think it is my favorite movie of the year. And I really recommend checking it out if you're cool with a very slow burn, atmospheric, creeping dread kind of movie, which I very much love. So that's my watch list, but what about you? What have you been watching over the last month? Please let me know down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, check out this video right over here. That's my last watch list video. So if you enjoyed this, you're probably gonna enjoy that video as well as this playlist right down here of all of my monthly watch lists. I've been doing this for well over a year now, never missed a month. But also, if you enjoyed it, give a like to the video and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you very soon.